Daily affirmations. I am wise. I am quick-witted. I will get this recorded in under an hour. Hello, welcome back. I actually did a little analysis on a past live stream of mine, and I was gonna make this video a cut-up version of that, but after watching it back, I realized I missed out on a few key points. So lucky you get your own dedicated video. Before I get into talking about the characters and weapons, I do need to point out the differences in the gacha rules between Chronicled Banner and the regular character banner, because while I think all these characters are fairly good, or at least usable, those rules greatly change the value of the banner. The pity is the same as the character banner, hard of 90 and soft of 75, but it doesn't have capturing radiance, and if you lose your 50-50, your guarantee won't carry over to the next Chronicled banner. It uses fate points just like the weapon banner does, and after the banner rolls over, those points will reset. So if you really want a character that's on this banner, you should only wish for them if you have enough wishes to guarantee getting them, which is around 150. And with a lack of capturing radiance, you have a lower overall chance to win that 50-50, and if you do lose it, that won't help you build towards a capturing radiance guarantee. For those who don't know, if you lose 50-50s, you get slowly increased chances to get capturing radiance, and 3 in a row gets you a guarantee. So pulling on this banner and losing won't increment that counter, and if you have a guarantee from capturing radiance, you can't use it on the Chronicled banner. Now when it comes to weapons, there's no capturing radiance on the weapon banner, so we don't have to think about that. But the weapon banner has a lower pity than all the other banners in the game. It's only 80 with a soft pity of around 65. On average, you're going to have to spend more wishes to get a weapon off the Chronicled banner than you would off the weapon banner. With one exception in each category, all of the weapons and the units on this banner are pretty decent. There are some crazy ones, there are definitely ones that are better than the others, but you can make nearly everything on this banner work fairly well. So this Chronicled banner was revealed on the live stream the other day, and it's probably the best Chronicled banner that we've had, although that's not really saying much as the last two banners have both had standard characters. And while all the characters here are not necessarily better than the standard characters that were on those banners, it feels nicer that when you lose your 50-50 on this one, you will have a 100% chance to lose it to a limited character. Not necessarily better, but it feels better. I'm going to split these characters up into segments, and that will also unintentionally make me talk about them in order of relevance, starting with the 4 on-field DPSs, those being Ayato, Yoimiya, Ito, and Ayaka. Starting with Ayato and Yoimiya, I obviously don't have them, so take anything I say with a grain of salt, but from what I know, I can say that they are both serviceable. Ayato is probably the worst character here, although he's far from useless. Simply being able to do reasonable hydro damage and do normal attacks on field is kind of enough for a lot of teams. He's a decent driver, but his numbers are pretty undertuned, and he doesn't fit particularly well into any one archetype. He kind of just stands on field and does good enough, while your off-fielders usually end up doing most of the damage. Not worth going for from a sheer power perspective, but if you like him and if you want to go for him, there are a lot of ways to make him work. And him being a little undertuned is not unique to him at all. There are a fair few units on this banner whose numbers have just not kept up. This is kind of a side note thing, as it's not really something he's great at, but it's something he can do. His burst provides automatic off-field hydro application and a normal attack bonus, which it's not insanely powerful, but it is another thing that you can do if you really just want to find places to use him. Not the most interesting or powerful unit, but he's more than functional. Much of the same goes for Yoimiya, given that they're both normal attack spammers. That's not too crazy, but her numbers are a decent amount better, and her ICD and multipliers line up fairly well to be used in Vape. In return, she does have a lot more gameplay issues than Ayato. No tracking on her normals can make her shots miss a fair amount, and her optimal combo being her entire normal attack string makes a shielder a near requirement. She also didn't get the same buff from Melt as other pyro carries did, but she can be quite good in overload teams. So she's gotten a bit of scaling. Overall, a little harder to play than Ayato, and she has a few more restrictions as well, but she gets a higher damage ceiling in return. Except apparently she can do Burgeon well. shout out to that Burgeon Yoimiya guy who shows up seemingly everywhere. The other two units I think have fared a bit better, especially recently. Ito was stuck suffering in Mono Geo for a pretty long time, but Shilonen came and freed him up. Now his best team is Shilonen, Yelan, and Farina, fairly universal units that you are pretty likely to have. They are all limited 5 stars, which is a downside, but he's a lot less niche than he used to be. Still not all that interesting, not much potential for shenanigans. He's a Geo DPS. He's effectively doing yellow physical, but like the other two, if you like him, you can make him work, and he feels pretty good. The last and best of our on-fielders is Ayaka. I've grown to like Ayaka's design a lot more over time as a quick swap DPS with a lot of burst potential, but because of how her burst works, she's pretty much been locked to freeze for a pretty long time. She had mono cryo teams before, but those were fairly reliant on Shenhe, who is a pretty niche and not widely owned unit. Farina was more of a side grade for her than an upgrade, as her existing teams were already pretty synergistic, and to give up either Kazuha or Shenhe or even like Rosaria to fit in a healer with less offensive capability made them perform around the same as her non-Farina teams. So she was pretty solid for a long time, and I would actually say with an asterisk that she still is pretty solid. Every time a freezable abyss comes around, you get Ayaka players tearing through it. It's just that we don't get a lot of freezable abysses anymore. And now she's getting access to Escoffier. Escoffier is a res shredder, Escoffier is a damage dealer, and she's a full party healer for Farina, which finally allows Farina to have a good slot in Ayaka teams. Escoffier is going to be a massive buff to Ayaka, and you might have heard the 100k DPS number being thrown around, but I want to be clear that 100k DPS is going to be for Ayaka's team, not for Ayaka. Escoffier is doing like 30 to 40% of it. Still a good buffer for Ayaka, still gonna make Ayaka do bigger numbers than ever, but make no mistake, unlike old Ayaka hypercarry teams, Ayaka is not going to be the sole carry. That is a dual DPS team, maybe even triple DPS if you consider Farina. I think even before Escoffier, Ayaka was the best, with the asterisk that that was only in freezable content. With Escoffier, she is going to be clearly the best, and she's not going to fall off as hard in non-freezable content. And funnily enough, I ordered them based on power, but I think I also passively ordered them on difficulty of play. Next up is the two hybrid units. Both Yaimiko and Kokomi deal solid damage and have flexible hybrid on-fielder, off-fielder kits. And I think before this patch, I would have had a harder time saying which is quote-unquote better, but Escoffier's existence makes Kokomi a little bit worse. Neither of them deal fantastic damage, but they both get a lot of strength from their flexibility. Yai is actually the unit that I'm going to be going for. I really like her kit design, and I'm a big Electro fan. Most people already know that Dendro was a solid buff for her, but Overload was arguably a bigger one, and she has medium field time requirements, so she's a really good candidate for dual DPS teams. A lot of these things are true about Kokomi as well, although she trades a lot of her personal damage for healing, which was a really useful utility, especially when attached to Hydro, which is always a good element. But now that Escoffier exists, and she does pretty much everything that Kokomi does, but better, and she does it all off-field, I think that Kokomi has lost a fair bit of her value. She still has her element over Escoffier. Hydro is a lot more flexible than Cryo, but Escoffier has certainly reduced the situations in which Kokomi is relevant. I still consider these two to be better than all of the on-fielders, except maybe Ayaka, because I think their flexibility is a big aspect of their strength, but neither are particularly meta anymore. The last two units are the dedicated off-fielders, and while I do think Kazuha is winning out here, I think the competition is a lot closer than people think. Chiori is not a particularly interesting or flexible unit. She just does off-field damage, and for her damage to be particularly good, she's reliant on geoconstructs. Kachina having a geoconstruct and access to the scroll set makes Chiori a fair bit better, as everybody has access to a free unit that will give Chiori both dolls and a 40% damage bonus. And the other fairly universal unit that gets access to a construct is Zhongli. And I actually think Chiori and Zhongli are fairly similar. They're both kind of boring, but they both do what they do very well with very little interference for the rest of your team. Shiori do damage, Zhongli make you immortal, and neither of them messes with your application or your reactions all too much. A lot of people like running Zhongli in their teams for comfort anyways, so getting some off-field damage that doesn't interfere with what's going on in the rest of your team and uses those chunky Fontaine multipliers certainly doesn't hurt. But the unit that most people will be interested in is obviously Kazuha. This one's a weird one. He's the best on the banner. I mean, he's Kazuha. He does Kazuha things. Res Shred, damage bonus, grouping, reactions. You already know who he is. And it's nice that they included him over Mizuki. He's obviously a much better unit, and that makes it so there are no standard units on the banner. But the weird thing is, I think a lot of people already own Kazuha. If you don't, he's a great pull, but he's slowly losing value over time. As more and more Res Shredders come into the game and VV becomes less relevant, Kazuha just has less places to be. Obviously, we have Shilonen. She trades grouping and damage for comfort and healing. Seat Lali shreds res for melt teams. Escoffier is coming out and doing that for cryo and hydro teams, not freeze teams, because they don't want her to trigger freeze. They just want the right units in the party. And there has always been Sucrose. Sucrose being close enough to Kazuha and sometimes better has always been the number one reason to not pull Kazuha. He's a unit that you can get away with not pulling, but if you do want to pull him, he is easy to find use for. Now, for those who do have Kazuha, this acts as a segue into me talking about constellations, because there's a good chance you already have these units. I mean, me, myself, I already have 4. So losing your 50-50 to one of them might mean getting an early constellation instead of a new unit. And while Kazuha's constellations certainly aren't the worst on the banner, they're also not the best. One of Kazuha's weaknesses is that he can have some pretty long field time between his skill and burst animation, and his C1 does increase his grouping capabilities and his personal damage, but it requires you to spend even longer on field with him. And as time goes on and Hoyo does single target abyss after single target abyss, his grouping becomes less and less relevant. I'm only going to go up to C2 for now, and Kazuha's C2 is fine. It buffs your EM while standing within his burst. This makes him better than Sucrose in almost every situation, but the fact that Sucrose exists, again, decreases the value of this constellation. You don't need a 5-star with multiple constellations to give yourself Res Shred and an EM buff, and his burst only lasts 8 seconds. There also can be issues of his burst interfering with your application. The numbers look nice, but in practice, this can be somewhat difficult to get use out of. The 4 DPS constellations are all a fair bit worse though. Ayaka C1 basically doesn't exist. It's a skill cooldown reduction that requires you to on-field her to work. Ayaka teams are quick swappy. C2 is like Kazuha's, it looks better than it is. She gets 2 extra mini bursts beside her main burst, but when you're playing her with Shenhe, those bursts will consume Shenhe's quill stacks faster. They also can have a hard time sticking to enemies like her regular burst does. Looks good, can be difficult to get use out of. I don't even know Ayato's constellations. Honestly, I'm just kind of amazed. It's insane that they used to put conditional buffs into 5-star constellations. Yeah, this is bad. This is real bad. Ayato has some minor HP scaling in his kit. This constellation makes that HP scaling a tiny bit better, but the maximum HP it gives makes it not really worth building for. Again, not that great of a damage increase. Both his C1 and C2 kinda suck. I remember that Ito's C1, it's kind of okay. Gets some more charge attack stacks, lets him do some more combos. It's still not a crazy DPS increase. C2 is more of a comfort thing. It reduces his energy needs, and even though it was made to function in mono geo, it still works in double geo with Shilonen. Especially now that his energy needs are higher than they used to be, this actually can be kind of decent. And Yoimiya, again, C1 is kind of poopy. They just didn't make good C1s around this time. It's a conditional 20% attack increase when you defeat an opponent that's affected by her burst, and the burst duration extension isn't that great. In comparison, C2 is a basically unconditional 25 pyro damage bonus. Nothing compared to current constellations, but undeniably an upgrade. For the other two, Miko C1 is probably the best C1 besides the last character that I'm gonna get to. She has crazy energy needs that can lead to you bursting only every other rotation with her, although her burst still is a significant source of her damage. So C1 letting you get it consistently can be a good gameplay feel thing and a fairly good DPS increase. C2 increases the multipliers on a skill, pretty good damage increase, about the same that you would get from the skill levels that are C3. Attack range is a nice quality of life. And then Kokomi, in general, her constellations aren't that great. Her whole kit is designed around sacrificing personal damage for healing, but her constellations are all damage focused. So while C1 is a sizable increase to her damage being as low as it is to start makes it a lot less relevant. And C2, I was actually lying. It gives healing bonuses. It makes her skill and her normal attacks while in burst heal more. She already healed enough to begin with. This is kind of pointless. Then finally, the last character with the best constellations is unsurprisingly Chiori. She has modern constellation design. You know what? I'm gonna show off to you guys. I actually have C1. This gives her doll attack more AoE, which is a good quality of life. But of course, the main thing that it does is it makes her not reliant on a geoconstruct anymore. When she came out, that was pretty much only relevant with Navia, but now that Shilonen exists, them together create the infamous wheelchair core. Although there are a lot of other better wheelchair cores, this one is very strong. If you're using her in mono geo teams, you are already meeting the construct requirement, so C1 does basically nothing except for the range. I actually forgot, this makes her function with Noelle. If you're doing something like Chiori, Goro, Noelle, Farina, neither Noelle or Goro have a geoconstruct. It's kind of weird as it is functionally useless in a good few teams, but her best teams include Shilonen or Navia, and in those teams, this constellation is around an 80% damage increase. C2 is a lot less conditional, it's just good. It essentially lets her summon a third doll after using her burst, which gives you a reason to use her burst, because these multipliers are miserable and the animation is kind of long. And while I'm gonna stop here, I should mention that the rest of her constellations are also crazy. She has some of the best whale investment scaling in the entire game. Not that that's really relevant, I like Chiori and I want to find good things to say about her. Anyways, it's been an hour, so I've already failed my goal. Let's take a look at the weapons. I have to start off with the same thing I always say about the weapon banner. I just don't think weapons are worth it in general. The damage increases that they give aren't required to clear any of the game's content. There are 100 different ways that you can make your character perform better without pulling a weapon for them. It can be valuable to get generic stat sticks that will work well on a lot of characters and provide a small increase across your entire account. And to be fair, this weapon banner is kind of good for that. But I genuinely think the best reason to pull for weapons is for drip. Not to say you should pull weapons to make your characters look better. I'm saying you shouldn't pull weapons to make them deal more damage. Very, very solid weapon banner, especially if you want a generic stat stick sword. Mistsplitter is the standout here, but Haran and Uraku both do the job fairly well. So if you're going for Mistsplitter and you lose to one of them, I would actually maybe be happy with that and just give up on Mistsplitter. Then we have Red Horde and Kagura's. Kagura's is no longer the universally good stat stick that it was. There are better ones that have come out since, but it's still a 5-star weapon with a good stat line. And while most units can't max out its 3-stack passive, they can get 1, which is decent. Red Horn has a very good base stat line, low base attack, insanely high crit damage, but the buff that it gives allows you to put it on units who wouldn't normally be using their normally charged attacks and get more value out of them. Then we have the two stinkers, which are Freedom Sworn and Thundering Pulse. I'll start off with the controversial one of Freedom Sworn. The buff that it gives is kind of weird and conditional, and if you can't make use of the normal charged and plunging attack buff, it just is not all that good. Kazuha's real best in slot is R5 Zyphos. Certainly not useless, but I wouldn't say it's worth going for. Next up, Thundering Pulse. It has a good stat line, but the majority of its passive is dedicated towards buffing normal attack damage, which most bow units don't do. There are way better generic effects that you can get out of different weapons, but the good stat line makes it fine enough. And then there's the bomb of the donut. I don't even know if I need to explain why this thing is bad. Going back to what I said about Kokomi's constellations, she doesn't deal a lot of damage, but this weapon is meant to help you deal more damage. Just use Prototype Amber. It's not worth it. Okay. Alright, I hath returned. It's been a few hours. I went outside. And since this is a Chronicle, we already know all the 4 stars. We don't have to wait for Hoyo to announce them a day before the banner drops. It's all the Inazuma 4-star characters and weapon. Starting with the weapons, I can't show off Akumaru and Wavebreaker, but I actually do have Moon's Moon. All of these weapons have an attack percent substat and the exact same passive. For every point of energy that your character's burst costs in your whole party, the equipping character will get a small damage bonus on their burst. Akumaru, the Claymore, has a mid base attack of 510, Moon's Moon has a high base attack of 565, and Wavebreaker's Fin has the highest a 4-star can have at 620. I did a more detailed breakdown on my live stream, but essentially, because these are weapons with attack percent substats, and they ask that your characters have high burst costs, each one of them is only useful on like 1 or 2 characters, and even then, they usually need multiple refinements to be competitive with other 4-stars. Sara is basically the only character that can use the bow. Beto is the only character that can really use the claymore. However, the polearm actually has 2 potential users in Xiangling and Raiden. Particularly Raiden, with her burst cost of 90, is pretty decent at building up the passive, but the issue with using it on Raiden or Xiangling is that the catch exists. Free-to-play weapon, fully refinable by fishing, and Wavebreaker's Fin can only beat out the catch in some scenarios, not all, at Refinement 5. Weapon refinements are already pretty hard to get on weapon banners, but on the Chronicled banner that has a much larger 4-star pool, they're going to be even harder to get. Don't get me wrong, these weapons aren't useless, but they only become competitive at Refinement 5, which is hard to get, and even then, you have a lot of other competitive options. The characters are a bit more interesting. Our most recent Inazuma unit is Kirara. She was given away for free right before Netland started, so there's a good chance you have a copy of her. All Kirara offers at C0 is a big shield and a surprisingly functional 4-star DPS. She's gotten even better with the introduction of Yansan. Her skill can get some decent spread procs going, and her burst just has a ridiculously big multiplier, but most of you are probably using her for the purpose of her shield. As a Dendra support, she's fine at C0, she definitely functions, but she doesn't get any off-field application until C4. She's usable in quick swap teams before that, but this will make her better and more consistent in teams with longer rotations. And C6 gives her a pretty small buff. It's not enough to make you want to use her as a dedicated buffer, but it essentially compensates the rest of your team for the field time that Kirara takes. Strong shield, good in aggravate teams, surprisingly good damage herself. Kirara is a cool unit. As I talked about with Kazuha, VV is losing a lot of its relevance because characters are coming out that shred resistance in their kits, but it's certainly not bad, and neither is Heizo. He's as solid of an on-field driver as any Animo Catalyst unit is, and he can do some reasonable talent damage. You also can build him to be a full on-field skill nuker. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it, but it's good enough to clear. Not great, but if you want to make use of him, you can find a lot of ways. Heizo's C1, 3, 5, and 6 are all geared towards giving him more damage. His C2 gives his burst a little extra grouping, and the C4 regenerates some energy for it. None of them are particularly crazy, none of them are really necessary. C6 is the best for his damage, but there's no con that unlocks any specific thing that you need to be able to play him. Next up, Kuki. She holds her role as the second best Hyper Bloom trigger in the game. Number 1 is Raiden, but Kuki trades a little bit of Hyper Bloom DPS for healing. That defensive utility can be pretty nice. She also tends to run fairly infrequently, so if you can grab a copy of Kuki or 2 on this banner, that's pretty nice. None of her cons are particularly special except her C2 increases her skill duration by 3 seconds. At base, it is only 12 seconds. Without it, you need to do some shenanigans with her burst to get 100% uptime in Hyper Bloom. This makes her a lot comfier of a unit. Next up is poor little Goro, the Mono Geo man himself. He was meant to be a dedicated Ito buffer, but he's not even doing that anymore. He was already kind of bad when he had his niche of buffing Ito, so now that he doesn't have that, there's not much of a point to him existing. Sorry Goro fans, this guy is the worst unit on the banner by far. I made a whole video about him because of that. If you really want to use him for geo buffing purposes, he doesn't become remotely competitive until C6 with the crit damage. The rest of his cons are not particularly useful. So yeah, sorry, buddy. Then we have Toma. Toma's a unit that I think has gained in value slowly over time. There weren't a lot of use cases for him when he came out, but with the introduction of Dendro, he became one of the best Burgeon triggers in the game. Not that anybody plays Burgeon. He's a good defensive option and Pyro Replier, usable in Overload teams with Chlorand, usable in Kniech Burning teams. His shield, when combined with his Pyro application off field, has become a lot more useful over time. C2 and C4 are pretty large buffs to his burst. C2 makes it last 3 seconds more, increases it from 15 seconds to 18, that makes him able to go first in a lot of your rotations. C4 gives you an energy refund, and his C6 is also solid. 15% buff on your normal charge and plunging attacks. Nothing big, but it's there. Next up is Sarah. She's a weird one because she actually is kind of good, but she's difficult to play and a lot of people don't like it, and she's not good enough that if you don't enjoy playing Sarah, I don't think it's worth it learning how. If you do like her, of course she's usable in Raiden teams. She was meant to be a Raiden support. She's also solid in Clorand teams and has found another home in Varesa teams. And I want to do some stuff involving Sethos in the future with her. C2, C5, and C6 are the big ones. I would say C2 is nearly mandatory if you want to play her. If you don't enjoy playing her and you just want to use her for her numbers, this makes her a lot less clunky. But if you do enjoy playing her, giving her a third option to buff characters makes her a bit more flexible and usually makes her able to buff herself more reliably. C5 is skill levels. That is what increases the buff that she gives, so that's always appreciated. C6 is what turns her into an actual good buffer. If you don't enjoy playing her, just don't do it before C6, it's not worth it. But if you're crazy and you do enjoy her, then her C6 is massive. I think the last one is Sayu, who I think belongs basically in the same category as Heizo. In terms of Animo healers, Jean is generally strictly better, but I don't like playing Jean. I think Sayu's funnier, so I play her a lot more. Outside of being a healer who can hold VV, she doesn't have a ton. I mean, she can be a decent aggravate unit, as I showed off in my 101. I still think she's a decent unit, but she's definitely falling off. For her constellations, C1 is maybe almost necessary. Without it, her burst will either damage or heal. With it, it will damage and heal, which just makes her a much more consistent healer. C4 is a very small energy refund. It can trigger off field, so it is at least consistent, but it often only results in around 6 to 8 energy every rotation, which isn't nothing, but it's not a lot either. C6 is okay. She's a bit of a split scaler before this. Her healing scales with attack and most of her damage scales with EM because she likes triggering swirls and extra reactions. This makes it so the damage and healing of her burst both scale with EM, except this doesn't affect the initial full party heal that her burst does. That is still attack only, and in the context of Farina teams, that's the most important healing. So it's kind of whatever. It's a good constellation, but it's not great. They're all decently usable with, I'd say, 2 good standouts being Kuki and Toma. If I'm feeling generous, I could include Kirara as well. And the one stinker of Goro. So as long as you don't get him, you're pretty happy. Thanks for tuning in. I'll see y'all in the next one, and I hope you have a lovely day.